You walk into a room and you already know. Before anyone says a word, before the conversation starts, you can feel it. The tension in someone's shoulders, the forced smile that doesn't reach the eyes, the heaviness sitting in the air that nobody else seems to notice. And without making a decision, without choosing to, something in you shifts. Their mood becomes your mood. Their anxiety quietly becomes yours. Their sadness settles into your chest like it moved in and forgot to ask permission. And you've always just called it being sensitive, being empathetic, being someone who cares. But if you're honest, really honest, you know it goes further than that. Because you don't just notice how people feel, you carry it. You take it home with you. You lie awake at 3 a.m, turning over a conversation that wasn't even yours to carry. You can't fully relax when someone around you is hurting, even if there's nothing you can do, even if they haven't asked you to fix anything, even if the problem has nothing to do with you. And the exhaustion that comes from that, the particular kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix, is something most people will never understand. Because from the outside, you look fine. You look caring and warm and present. But from the inside, you've been quietly absorbing the emotional weight of everyone around you for so long that you've almost forgotten what it feels like to just feel your own feelings. If that sounds familiar, stay with me. Because today we're getting into the psychology of people who carry everyone else's emotions, the ones the world calls too sensitive, and science calls something else entirely. Here's what nobody ever tells you. What you're experiencing has a name. It's called emotional enmeshment. And it's one of the most misunderstood patterns in all of psychology. It doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean something is wrong with your nervous system. It means your brain was wired, through very specific experiences, very early in your life, to treat other people's emotional states as your own responsibility. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly how that happened and what it's quietly been costing you. Let's start with what's actually happening inside you. When most people encounter someone who's upset, their brain registers it. They feel a degree of concern, maybe some discomfort, and then they continue existing as a separate person. Their emotional state remains mostly their own. But for you, the boundary between your feelings and someone else's feelings is much thinner than that, almost invisible sometimes. There's a concept in neuroscience built around mirror neurons, cells in your brain that fire when you observe someone else experiencing something, almost as if you were experiencing it yourself. This is the biological foundation of empathy. Everyone has them. But researchers have found that in people who grew up in emotionally intense or unpredictable environments, this system becomes hyperactivated. Your brain essentially learned to turn the sensitivity dial all the way up, and then never turned it back down. So when someone near you is anxious, your nervous system doesn't just notice, it responds. It treats that anxiety as a signal, as information, as something that requires your attention and possibly your action. Not because you decided to, but because your brain was trained to. And here's the part that's important to understand. That training didn't happen by accident. No one is born carrying other people's emotions. Babies feel their own hunger, their own discomfort, their own joy, fully and completely and without any confusion about whose feelings belong to whom. The boundary between self and other is actually something we develop over time, and the environments we grow up in shape exactly how solid that boundary becomes. Maybe you grew up in a house where someone's mood, a parent, a sibling, someone close, could shift the entire atmosphere without warning, where you learned to read the room before you even entered it, because catching the signs early meant you could prepare, could adjust, could maybe even prevent the storm. Your sensitivity wasn't a flaw. It was a finely tuned radar system your younger self built to navigate an unpredictable world. Maybe you were the one people leaned on, the one who was always emotionally available, always steady, always the person others came to when things fell apart. And it felt meaningful. It felt like your role. But what nobody asked was how you were doing while you were busy holding everyone else together. Maybe expressing your own emotions felt unsafe or unwelcome. So over time, you redirected that energy outward. You became an expert in other people's feelings because your own were somewhere you weren't allowed to fully go. There's a psychologist named Dr. Lindsay Gibson who has written extensively about emotionally immature relationships and what they do to the people inside them. And what she found, consistently, is that when children grow up feeling responsible for the emotional well-being of the adults around them, they carry that responsibility into every relationship they'll ever have. It becomes the water they swim in, the default setting they don't even know they can change. Your nervous system learned that other people's emotions are urgent, that they require a response, that your comfort is secondary to managing the emotional environment around you. And it got very, very good at that job. The problem is that no one ever told it the job was never supposed to be yours in the first place. And the cost of that, this is the part that really matters, is enormous. And it collects so quietly you might not have noticed how much it's taken. It looks like relationships where you give far more than you receive, not because you're not loved, but because you became so focused on what everyone else needs that your own needs got smaller and smaller until they were almost invisible. It looks like a strange guilt that arrives whenever you prioritize yourself, like you're doing something wrong just by existing in a way that isn't useful to someone. It looks like difficulty knowing what you actually want, what you actually feel, separate from the emotional atmosphere around you. Because when you've spent years absorbing everyone else's experience, your own signal gets harder to hear. Dr. Gabor Maté, who has spent decades studying the link between emotional patterns and the body, puts it this way. When we are chronically attuned to others at the expense of ourselves, we don't just lose energy. We lose access to ourselves, to our own instincts, our own desires, our own sense of what's true for us separate from what everyone else is feeling. That's not a small thing. That is a quiet erosion of self that happens so gradually you might not even have a name for what's missing. You just know something is. But here's what's really worth sitting with, and this is the part that almost nobody says. The fact that you feel this deeply, the fact that you are this attuned to the people around you, this present to their pain, this genuinely moved by what moves them, that is not a problem to be fixed. That is one of the rarest and most profound capacities a human being can have. The world is desperately short of people who actually feel things, who show up fully, who don't look away from pain because it's uncomfortable. You are not too much. You have never been too much. You were just never given the tools to protect yourself while staying open. Nobody taught you that you could be deeply empathetic and still have a boundary, that you could care about someone's pain without making it your emergency, that you could be present with someone's sadness without climbing inside it and living there. That's the thing that changes everything. The boundary between compassion and absorption, between feeling with someone and losing yourself in what they feel. It's a line that's learnable, a skill that can be built. Not to make you colder or less caring, but to make what you give sustainable. To make sure that when you show up for people, you're actually there, not running on empty, not quietly drowning in feelings that don't belong to you. It starts with something deceptively simple, noticing. Noticing when a shift happens inside you that corresponds to someone else's emotional state. Pausing just for a moment and asking, is this mine? Did I bring this feeling into the room, or did I pick it up when I walked in? That pause, that tiny moment of separation, is where everything begins to change. It continues with permission. Permission to let someone else's feelings belong to them. Permission to witness someone's pain without fixing it, absorbing it, or carrying it home. Permission to say to yourself, I care about this person deeply, and their experience is theirs. I am allowed to remain a separate person while still being fully present. And it deepens with the slow, sometimes uncomfortable practice of turning the same attention inward. Because when you've spent years focused outward, looking inward can feel strange at first, almost selfish. But it isn't. It is in fact the most necessary thing, because you cannot pour from a vessel that has never been filled. You cannot give from a self that has never been tended to. The people who are meant to be in your life, the ones worth showing up for, do not need you to disappear into their feelings. They need you. The real, full, boundaried, present version of you. And that version only exists when you've kept enough of yourself intact to share. Here's what becomes clear when you put all of this together. You carry everyone else's emotions not because you're weak, not because you're broken, not because something went wrong with you. You carry them because you are someone who feels deeply in a world that taught you early that other people's feelings were your responsibility. That was never true. It was never your job. But you took it on with everything you had because that's the kind of person you are. And now, maybe slowly, maybe just beginning, you get to put some of it down. Not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally started including yourself in the circle of people worth caring for. That is not a loss. That is not you becoming someone different. That is you becoming more fully yourself than you have ever been allowed to be. And the fact that you're here, trying to understand this, looking for the words to name what you've been carrying, means the shift has already started. That's not a flaw you're fixing. That's healing. If this felt like someone finally said the thing you didn't know you needed to hear, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.